Hello people, and welcome to Crypto Exposed. Here's what will actually drive XRP price in 2026. Expert shares key factors. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, so I wanted to get into this because, I think with what's come into 2026 now and seeing a bit of a shift in terms of the way people are looking at price predictions, I think this is the right time to start really, going a bit more stern in regards to trying to explain what the factors are for XRP price for people who, they're not just necessarily following influencers, they just want to see what the truth is and what's realistic. I think this is the time to go stronger on that, because I've been doing this from the beginning of my channel, but it wasn't getting nowhere near as much traction as the high price XRP predictions. So the year is 2026 and XRP isn't $10,000. Now, hate to burst your bubble, guys. I've been saying it from the beginning of my channel. You can check back. You can see numerous videos that I've done about XRP. $10,000, it just ain't going to happen. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but that's the reality. So if you guys are coming now wanting to seek the truth, the likelihood of, XRP reaching $10,000 is very slim, pretty much slim to none, right? So I'm just here to give you realistic stuff now. But let's go through what will actually drive XRP price. So who's the expert in question? It's someone on Twitter or X called All Things XRP. Now, another thing that I just want to say here when we get into this, look, you do see these articles where they call people experts and stuff like that. I think the term expert is thrown around very loosely in crypto. It's kind of like if you're an influencer with a big following, then you're just an expert. Look, none of us are experts. We're all people who are just doing our research and we're making predictions based on things like that. Me personally, I don't do predictions at all, because at the end of the day, we are just guessing. That's just the simple truth of the matter. So all these people speculating on certain things, they are just guessing. But you can come to, reasonable conclusions of what can and can't happen for XRP based on research. So I do think it is good to share those ideas. And so let's get into what will actually drive price for XRP. So first things first, we've got transaction volume may not be the main catalyst. The popular argument is that higher transaction volume on the XRPL will naturally push XRP's price higher. However, critics of this view note that XRP settles transactions in just a few seconds. Because money moves through the network so quickly, large transaction volumes do not necessarily require a large amount of XRP to be held at any given time. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Look, this is the thing. A lot of people keep talking about how all these banks using XRP and, it's settling, millions and billions of transfers. It's going to be a thing where it's going to push the price higher. If XRP can settle these transactions in 3 to 5 seconds, then you've got to understand how quick that is to be able to utilize that XRP at that time, and then it can just be recycled for another transaction. So when people are saying like, oh, well, it's going to need to be a higher price to settle all these transactions, no, that will make it ideal in the sense of, okay, you don't need as much XRP, but it's not going to change it if it is a higher price. It's just going to make it a bit more efficient, but it doesn't mean that XRP can't do the transfers at the price that it's currently at. At the end of the day, it will just mean that the banks will need more XRP, but it doesn't matter because the price is still the same, right? So like, let's just say, for example, you needed 1 XRP that cost, let's just say hypothetically $100, right? You pay $100, or it could be that you need 100 XRP that costs $100 and you've still paid $100. So what you're paying for the XRP is irrelevant, right? You're still paying the same price no matter what XRP you buy. It's about the amount that's being used. And so what you've got to understand here is the volume is not what's going to make the price go up. You've also got to remember that for people who want to use, let's just say, for example, ODL/Ripple payments, that doesn't necessarily mean to even use that software that you're using XRP, right? So you can choose what you want to use. This is another thing a lot of people don't understand. Like, obviously, XRP is positioned as a bridge asset. You've got to understand that anything can be a bridge asset. Like, Bitcoin can actually be a bridge asset. Now, don't get me wrong, Bitcoin would be a terrible choice, but it's possible. So what people don't understand is that they think like XRP is the only cryptocurrency that can be a bridge asset. No, there can be numerous. An example of this is when Ripple were going through the SEC lawsuit, they couldn't transact in America with XRP because it was going through the lawsuit, right? So what did they do at the time? They were using USDT. They were using Tether as the bridge currency to do transactions, ODL, in America. So it's really not necessarily about, just because they're using ODL or Ripple payments, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean that by default they're using XRP, right? They could be using a different cryptocurrency. They could be using normal currency like fiat currencies, right? So the transaction volume, what you're going to understand with that, for me, what I look at with volume and stuff, it's not really about that equating to a higher price. It's more about like what people look at it in terms of what the network can do. So if you just hear, for example, the XRP ledger is handling, thousands, if not, millions of payments a day successfully, and there's no network outages and stuff like that, that would make it to be deemed an efficient network, right? Because it can handle a lot of volume and it's not causing any downtime. And so a lot of like developers, for example, or banks may say, well, we want to use the XRP ledger because it can handle a lot of volume. Or people might look at that and say, wow, that sounds like a very powerful network. I want to invest in that network. How can I do that? Well, buy the XRP, the native token, right? So that's the way it would work more than this kind of thing of, the price going up because of them doing the transfers by default. Like that's not necessarily how it works. So I agree with that one. Supply lockup could be the key. According to analysis shared by All Things XRP, supply lockup is becoming a more important factor. Instead of XRP being used and released quickly, more XRP is now being locked or held within different systems. Several trends support this idea. MXRP DeFi products are targeting up to 10 billion worth of locked XRP. The Flare network aims to lock around 5 billion XRP by mid-2026. XRP ETFs are already holding more than 500 million XRP. Exchange reserves continue to decline, reducing the readily available supply. These developments are not about transaction speed or usage, they represent XRP removed from the active trading supply for extended periods. Yeah, so again, look, when it's all said and done, the things that's really going to drive XRP price, 2 words, supply and demand, right? Now, there are factors that can obviously affect the supply and demand. So obviously, for example, supply lockup, yeah, that's true. So if you've got a load of XRP that is, being locked up for various different reasons, that's reducing the supply that's actually available out for people to, go and accumulate XRP, for example, right? So that could lead to what they call a supply shock. Now, I am going to get into that in a second because there's another point in regards to that, so I'm going to cover that. But these are the type of things that you think about. Like, you want to think about what's going to lead to the supply necessarily being limited, right? But again, don't just think because the supply is limited, that means that it can just jump up to $10,000. Like, you still got to be a bit more grounded in reality when you think about this, right? But yes, supply lockups, things like this can definitely help. But it depends to the extreme of what we're talking about as well. And so this is going to be something that I will touch on in a second. So shrinking tradable supply changes the equation. When the amount of XRP available for trading decreases while demand remains steady or grows, basic supply and demand dynamics, what I just said, right, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, come into play. A shrinking tradable float can create upward price pressure even without explosive growth in daily transaction counts. This is why some analysts believe the focus should shift from usage metrics to change in XRP supply. While the supply shock narrative is still developing, supporters argue that it becomes more plausible with each new lockup milestone. Meanwhile, some critics note that despite growing discussion of an XRP, quote, supply shock, unquote, on-chain data does not fully support the narrative. Yeah, so I am going to get into that more in a second, but I do ultimately agree with the idea that, if you're talking about supply shock in the true sense, then yes, that's what's going to help towards price. But again, there's going to be a caveat to that, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. But yes, like I say, supply and demand, like the way the price works is, when the supply gets lower and the demand is higher, the price needs to be more. That's just how it works. That's generally how all cryptos work. That's not just XRP specific. That could be applied to stocks. That can be applied to gold. That can be applied to crypto, XRP, Bitcoin, whatever, right? That's just the way things work in general, supply and demand. So that's what's going to bring the price ultimately. It's not going to be them setting the price secretly or anything like that. It's not going to be all these banks, you know, turning around and using XRP. It's going to be supply and demand. And so there are things that obviously you can do in terms of increasing the demand and decreasing the supply. So again, locking up XRP. More people wanting to accumulate XRP because they deem it a valuable asset. You know, like people putting XRP away in cold storage. You know, increasing in terms of, you know, Ripple doing more things for XRP. Other developers, not just Ripple, doing more things for XRP, which makes it a more utilized platform. You know, like if you think about Ethereum, and I don't hold Ethereum, by the way, so I just want to make that clear. I'm not here trying to, you know, toot Ethereum's horn or anything like that. But if you think about Ethereum, like when it comes to like smart contracts, they're heavily utilized. So if XRP can have like, you know, use cases that's developed, like things like tokenization and stuff like that. Now, you know, things like that is going to add to the utility of the network, and it means it's being used more frequently, and it's going to add to more people maybe wanting to use that network, right? So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Ethereum, like, are very big in DeFi, and that's why I say, like, with the smart contracts, that's why they've got their dominance, but also because, you know, there was some dirty tactics at play with ETHgate. We know that as well. But this is what I'm saying, like, with XRP having more things like that, you know, like more developers creating different use cases that other people want to utilize, that's going to be the kind of thing that adds to like the demand. Yeah, people wanting to use XRP because of these reasons, right? And then you've got like the institutional side of things as well, where obviously people are wanting to get XRP for utility reasons. You know, like, yes, I'm not saying that every bank in the world is going to use XRP. But there are banks that will. There are banks who are currently doing it right now. So I'm not saying that, you know, no bank is going to use it. There are banks using it, but it's just one of those things where if they can get more banks, or if they can create more demand for other reasons as well, not just cross-border payments, you know, not just ODL/Ripple payments, like other reasons, like there's other factors that could bring demand to XRP. And I think an example of that might be like XRP being used for the clearinghouse that Ripple have brought, right? That's a whole new use case. All that activity is going to be on the XRP ledger. So that kind of thing is all going to be adding to more usage on the network. And again, more people may be deeming it a valuable asset because it's, you know, like covering that type of volume. Okay, let's move on to the next point. So XRP supply shock claims lack data support. Proponents often cite declining exchange balances, particularly on Binance, as a bullish signal. However, recent data shows that exchanges still collectively hold 15.4 billion XRP across 26 platforms. Upbit leads with 6.25 billion XRP, followed by Binance with 2.52 billion and Bitfirm with 1.82 billion, indicating that ample liquidity remains. Legal expert Bill Morgan criticised the supply shock thesis, noting that exchange-held XRP accounts for about 15% of total supply and roughly 25% of circulating supply, far from scarcity. He also dismissed the impact of spot XRP ETFs, which hold less than 1% of total supply. So yeah, this is where I wanted to come in with the caveat about the supply shock claims, right? So the supply shock in theory is correct, right? Like if you had something where a lot of XRP was locked up and there was a low amount of the supply and the demand rose huge, that would cause a supply shock. But what I just wanted to make clear is I'm not saying that there's a supply shock crisis going on right now, because I've seen some people speaking about this as one of the reasons as to why, you know, XRP is going to go up in value soon. A lot of people are saying that like there's only like, I think they said there's only like a few million left on some exchanges, which the data clearly here shows that isn't the case. So what I want to say is like the supply shock theory, it is true. Like that is true in terms of if that was to happen, then yes, that would equate to higher prices. But what I'm trying to say is I'm not saying that that's what's currently going on. So you would need a true supply shock to happen. From what I've seen from the data, there is more than enough XRP at the moment. It's not going to cause a supply shock. It's just not, because there's more than enough XRP at this current point to go around. Now, could it be that over time, especially for example, this year with the Clarity Act, like if that does come through in terms of, you know, crypto regulations, and then maybe institutions wanting to jump in, could that cause a potential supply shock? Possibly. I can't say 100% it would happen. I don't know. We'd have to see, right? But that is plausible. That could happen. But as it stands right now, people saying that there is a supply shock going on right now, it's just not accurate. It's just not. Like, there's plenty of XRP at this current time to go around. It's not an issue at this point. So, yeah, like, I hope this has just helped in regards to showing you guys what really will drive the price. Like, I think a lot of these narratives that people put across to you, all these things about, the banks resetting the price, or they're all secretly waiting to use XRP. I hope that now we're in 2026, because look, forget, like, I know Jake Claver made a prediction about XRP which was incorrect. There's been numerous other influencers who have made incorrect price predictions for 2025. Like, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who make claims about XRP, right? And I've got friends who literally, I'm not joking when I tell you, they believed wholeheartedly they were going to be multimillionaires by the end of 2025. And I'm not saying that to mock them. What I'm saying is that there was a lot of people who believed these narratives. So what I'm trying to say is, now that that's happened and 2025 has been and gone, I hope, for the people who are a bit more curious and a bit more willing to say something's not right here and start seeking the truth, I hope that you can start to look at this type of information and take this in over just the hype and stuff, because you keep going with these influencers and all they're going to do is keep pushing the fantasy stuff. That's all they're going to keep doing. They're not going to stop, because there's enough people who still believe it for them to continue making money off of that narrative. But if you want the real truth of what's really going to drive price, it's not all these fantasy stuff that they make out. It really is supply and demand, and it's going to be about what, things are going to, again, as I say, decrease the supply and increase the demand. So that's what's going to, be looked into and what you're going to think about. And as I say, even when you do think about these supply shock theories, if that was to happen and the supply and the demand mechanics really do work and it's really going strong, you've still got to remember, that doesn't mean that it's just going to automatically hit $10,000. You've still got to be, really grounded with this. Don't think that, what I'm saying here is if everything plays out, then it's just going to hit $10,000. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, yes, that will lead to price increases. That will impact the price. But again, I can't tell you by how much. I can't say, hey, that means that XRP will get to $50 or whatever. I don't know. Nobody knows. Not one single person on earth knows. So we can say that it will increase the price, but I can't say how long it will take, and I can't say by how much, but it would increase the price. But I know a lot of people might be disheartened hearing that, but it's the truth. So if you just want the truth, then that should be satisfying, because it's, hey, okay, he's not telling me a price prediction, but okay, he's being real with me. He's telling me, look, I don't know what this is going to do in terms of how much it will raise the price, but that's the truth then. Nobody knows. Okay. For me personally, I'm just the kind of person, I would rather hear that. I'd rather hear that than someone keeps shouting at me $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. That's just me. Obviously, everybody's going to make their own decision about what they want to hear, but I would much rather hear someone telling me, okay, I would love to have a price point, I would love to have a date, but if it's the truth that no one knows, I can accept that. At least now I know the truth. And so I do this content for people who are like me, who are like-minded, right? Who just want the truth. So for you guys out there, this one's for you. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this has helped. And yeah, as I say, for me, I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing from the beginning, because I've always been pushing the truth anyway. So this is no different to me than any other day. But I hope people will start to look at this more, like evidence and data, because this is what's going to get you to believe about, what could really drive the price and what's realistic and what isn't. This is the kind of stuff that you want to see, so all I'm saying is 2026, if you want to start trying to find out, the reality, this is the kind of stuff you want to look into. That's just my word of advice to you. Thank you very much for watching this. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell. Take care.